Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the 5 greatest crossover musicians. That is, in this case, popular and jazz musicians who successfully crossed over to do excellent work in the field of classical music. The previous talk went the other way, and we'll get to that in a moment. But before we do, I just want to add something. This is completely on another topic. Regarding the video I posted recently on the critical response to the Met's new Tristan production, the one with Lisa Davidson and you know, all of those people and the crazy production and whatnot that was doing very well. I have to say, your comments were some of the most insightful, intelligent, thoughtful. I mean, there is such a terrific discussion after that video. Don't even watch the video. Just read the comments. It's marvelous. It's so much more pertinent. Excuse me. Excuse me. So much more topical and pertinent than the commentary coming from the critical universe, which was what I was talking about. I was talking about critical response to that production. And I really, really enjoyed reading your comments. People who contributed and who saw the production, thank you. Thank you for being just so damn intelligent about it. It was such a refreshing discussion. It really was. And I raised that issue because this one was just the opposite. The first video in this series, the 5 greatest crossover musicians, was classical musicians who successfully crossed over to pop musicians. And I explained exactly what I was talking about, and it's right in the title. And oh my God, I've never deleted so many comments in my life. So many of you just got it wrong. And I know why. I know the reason is because you saw what you wanted to see and you didn't watch the video. And as a result of that, you were just eager to put down your list, and your list was wrong. The idea was to have classical people who crossed over into popular and jazz music, classically trained people. And, you know, it was, or artists who lived successfully in both worlds. I mean, that's what it was about, right? And boy, oh boy, what a bunch of lousy, terrible responses I got. It was funny, actually. I was really having laughing out loud because it happens. It's a phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that's really very, very common. I remember, it happened to me several times. I remember when I was writing my book on Mozart and Mozart's vocal music, particularly the operas, I developed this theory of, the balance of arias and structure and the Marriage of Figaro. And because I had this amazing theory that was so brilliant, I actually added an aria for Bartolo, I think in the 4th act, which doesn't exist at all. I mean, I made it up because my theory was so cool and I knew what I wanted to happen desperately. And my editor, who was Bob Levine, who does, opera reviews at ClassicsToday.com, calls me up and says, there's a little problem here. There is no aria for Bartolo and whatever it was. It was very funny. And I was so embarrassed. But that's what happens sometimes. We come up with an idea and we just run with it and we don't pay attention to anything else, including clear instructions as to what's supposed to happen. So I think that's what happened with this one. But here, as the sequel to that first video, is the other way. Popular and jazz performers who successfully crossed over into the world of classical. The idea was sort of, to come up with where they started. What were they best known for? They were best known for popular and jazz music, and then they did the classical thing. And the other talk, it was kind of the opposite way, or people who lived comfortably, like I said, in both worlds, without there being any apparent conflict between them in the way that they wrote. I mean, there's always that element too, the in-betweeny type people. But anyway, so here is the list of popular to classical or jazz to classical. And hopefully some of those who, contributed to the first list but got deleted will look at the second list and maybe even watch this video. So they get a better sense of what we're talking about when they make their own lists. I know it's fun to just make the list and not bother with the video, but I mean, come on, folks. Humor me. Anyway, here we go. You ready? First, Keith Jarrett. Keith Jarrett was all over the first list because people said, well, he was classically trained. Listen, here's a news flash. Everybody is classically trained. If you learn an instrument, particularly the piano or the violin, you will be classically trained. Period. That's how you learn the instrument. After that, you can do whatever you damn well please. But the basics, is classical training on the instrument, because that's the history of the instrument. The pedagogy is classically based. So, yeah, most of the time anyway, you have to be classically trained. So that doesn't count. What matters is where your career is, where you first get recognized, and then what you do subsequently. That was the concept there. So Keith Jarrett is a jazz guy who's done some splendid work in the classical field, including Bach and Shostakovich and C.P.E. Bach and other things like that. So good for him. And this is the list he belongs on, folks, not the one you imagined you were seeing. So there's that one. Next, Barbra Streisand. Of course, there's only one album of classical Barbra, but it's a wonderful album. And, great singers are great singers, and songs are songs, and it doesn't matter what kind of songs they are. It doesn't matter what style they're written in. A great singer who's sensitive to text and can carry a tune is going to do something wonderful with those songs. And Streisand does. We've talked about this album before. So she's one of them. Next, Benny Goodman. Benny Goodman was a jazz clarinetist. I mean, a great, great, great jazz player, one of the all-time great big band swing guys. And he made a lot of classical recordings. He basically covered the entire classical repertoire for his instrument, including Weber's first concerto, the Nielsen concerto. He did Mozart's concerto and quintet. He did really, and had a lot of work written for him. There was contrasts, by Bartók with Bartók and Szigeti. He performed with them. Bernstein's Prelude, Fugue, and Riffs, Copland's Clarinet Concerto. He really was an outstanding musician. He gets criticized for his classical performances, particularly his Mozart, as being unidiomatic, and it may be. That may be true, but there isn't any question that he was a successful performer of the classical repertoire on his instrument. And whether you like the performances or don't like the performances, it was an extraordinary achievement by a tremendously gifted musician. Next, Liberace. Liberace is one of those guys who falls in the cracks, basically, doesn't he? Maybe I shouldn't say falls in the cracks. Well, never mind. But he was a classically trained musician. He became an enormous popular entertainer, and he mixed classical music in with his popular music programs, and he did it effortlessly, usually by somehow jiggering the classical stuff to suit his own sensibilities. He was the Leopold Stokowski of the piano in some ways. He was really, a showman, just a showman, and a law unto himself. But he was a person for whom there were no musical boundaries. Whether it was popular, whether it was classical, he didn't care. He just played it. And he played it very well, up to his, his standard and according to his lights. The classical musicians I know, the serious ones who knew him, thought that he was an extremely gifted musician. And they respected the work that he did. They respected it not only because he made himself a fortune doing it, but because he took it seriously. He really did. He treated the music with a lot of love and care, and he loved his audiences and put on a terrific show. And so I think he definitely belongs on the list. And when he made classical recordings, a lot of the people who listened to his popular music stuff bought those and became acquainted with a tremendous amount of classical music that they never otherwise would have heard. And, and that's an important thing. You can't denigrate that, although there are, some, sort of easy listening pianists who you might say dumb down the classics or present them in a, not particularly respectful way. But that's not really the point. The thing about Liberace is that he was honest. He was honest. He was a show person. That was his thing, and he didn't care if anybody thought it was tacky or tasteless. He just was doing his thing, and good for him. So Liberace. But last but not least, Duke Ellington. Now, Duke Ellington is not often considered a classical composer as such, because he was a composer and performer, of course. But he was one of the most gifted musicians of the 20th century, number one. And number two, he did take jazz, his language, and reimagine it in the form of all kinds of things that were, I mean, he wrote symphonic poems. There's Harlem, for example. He wrote suites, suites of all sorts. And remember, he interpreted Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker and Grieg's Peer Gynt in his own manner. He wrote ballets. He wrote sacred music. He indulged in larger forms and made them his own. And I think that he deserves to be considered a classic. And although the classical pieces that he produced, the suites, the ballets, the things like that, are not traditional in their sound or in their idiom, they are nonetheless classical works. And I think they deserve to be considered as such. And I think he deserves to be considered as such because he's just such an important and gifted composer-performer. And because he also sort of falls between the cracks, he tends to be marginalized, which he shouldn't be. He really, really shouldn't be. I mean, his work ought to be front and center in the history of 20th century music and 20th century classical music, in my view. So there you have the 5 greatest crossover musicians who went popular to classical. So now I can turn you loose, and hopefully we'll see lists that have a little bit more pertinence than the first go. Let's see what happens. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.